The little girl's voice cracked through the storm like glass shattering against stone. "Sir, please adopt us." Her words trembled in the night air, carried on the breath of a child whose lips had turned blue, whose tiny shoulders shivered beneath a thin, tattered coat. Snow clung to her hair like cruel ornaments, each flake melting too slowly against skin that had known more hunger than warmth. She clutched the hand of her younger brother, his eyes half closed, his body leaning against her as though every ounce of strength had already been spent. And before them stood a man most thought untouchable, a billionaire, Edward Halden, known in glossy magazines as ruthless, unbending, forged of steel and money. His tailored coat shielded him from the cold, but his face carried no shield against what those children had just asked of him. For the first time in years, silence pierced his armor deeper than any boardroom attack. The night had begun without warning. A gala at the city's grand hotel had just ended. Carriages of luxury whisking away men and women in gowns worth more than most lives. Laughter still echoed faintly from the golden doors when Edward stepped into the cold, his polished shoes crunching snow as if even winter yielded to it. But that was when he saw her, kneeling in the snow with her brother clutched to her chest, whispering warmth into his hair, begging fate to leave him alive until morning. She rose, her knees weak, her tears frozen to her cheeks, and she spoke, not with the timid politeness of the desperate, but with the raw defiance of one who had no more choices left. "Sir, please adopt us." The world seemed to pause. The doormen turned their faces away. Guests pulled their collars tighter and hurried past, unwilling to let compassion ruin their evening. Even the snow seemed to hush, as though listening for the answer that would decide if hope lived or died on that street. Edward Halden, billionaire of steel and silence, had once known such a night. Few remembered, fewer cared, and none dared speak of it. But the scars of his past were etched in his bones. Long before the wealth, long before the titles, he too had been a boy shivering against the cruelty of winter, waiting for someone, anyone to care enough to stop. The memory struck him now with the force of a storm. The hollow clatter of an empty stomach, the sound of boots splashing through puddles, never slowing to notice him. The day his own sister, frail, small but stronger than him, begged on his behalf. She had not survived. Her voice had faded long before he found the path to power. And it was her voice he heard now, resurrected in the plea of this black girl standing before him, eyes wide with desperation. The onlookers whispered. Some smirked at the absurdity. A billionaire, adopt street children, ridiculous. Others stayed silent, their indifference a heavier condemnation than cruelty itself. Yet Edward heard none of them. He heard only the trembling echo of the girl's words. "Sir, please adopt us." His breath caught in his throat, but his face betrayed nothing. For years, his survival had been built on silence, on never letting others glimpse the fractures beneath his polished surface. Yet his heart now thundered like war drums in his chest. Her name was Amina. She had carried her brother Elijah through alleys that reeked of smoke and hunger, through shelters that closed their doors when funds ran dry, through schools that saw them only as numbers to be erased when attendance faltered. Their mother had been a nurse, lost in a hospital outbreak that consumed her life, and left her children wandering the world with nothing but the memory of her touch. Their father had been a soldier, whose return had been promised but never delivered, buried instead beneath a flag folded too neatly for two children who needed his arms more than his medals. For months, they had hidden in corners of bus stations, surviving on scraps, trusting each other because no one else remained. Elijah, once bright with curiosity, had grown quiet, shadows filling his gaze. Amina, no more than 11, had become protector, mother, sister, and guardian all at once. She whispered promises into his ears at night. "I'll find us a home. I'll find someone who won't leave." Now, in the snow, she stood before the man who had the power to make her words true, or shatter them forever. Edward's silence stretched, and with it, the cruelty of the moment deepened. Passers-by sneered. "Children like that don't belong in marble halls," muttered one. "They'll only take advantage," said another. A businessman chuckled, shaking his head. "Imagine, the great Edward Halden playing father to beggars. The words were knives, each one slicing a dignity already worn thin. Amina did not flinch. She tightened her grip on Elijah's hand, her spine rigid though her body trembled. In her eyes burned the last flicker of defiance, daring the world to deny her once more. And Edward saw it. The same fire his sister once carried, the fire that had shielded him until it burned out too soon. Still he said nothing, for Edward knew silence could crush, silence could condemn. Yet silence could also protect. He weighed the power in his chest, the choice that stood like a blade between them. And then, slowly, he bent. He crouched until his eyes met hers, not from above, but level. Snow gathered on his dark coat, melting against the warmth of a man who had locked his humanity behind walls for decades. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, but it carried the force of a vow carved in stone. No child should ever beg for a home, he said. The crowd stilled. Even the jeers faltered. His words cut through the night, heavier than wealth, sharper than power. He lifted Elijah gently into his arms, the boy's head resting against his shoulder, and extended his other hand to Amina. "Come with me. You'll never have to beg again." Gasps rippled. Some watched in awe, others in disbelief, but none could deny the truth unfolding in the snow. Edward Halden, the untouchable billionaire, walked away from the Golden Hotel not with business partners or dignitaries, but with 2 children clinging to him as though the world had finally answered their cries. Behind him, silence reigned, not the silence of cruelty, but of respect. Even those who had mocked and now stood frozen, confronted with the reflection of their own cowardice. And in the hush of that moment, Amina whispered words that would echo long beyond the night. "You were the first who listened." The days that followed were not a fairy tale of instant happiness. The mansion's halls were wide and cold at first, intimidating to children who had known only cramped shelters. But slowly warmth spread, not from the marble, but from the man who began to rediscover himself through them. He sat by Elijah's bedside when fevers came. He learned the quiet laughter of Amina as she discovered books in his library, worlds she had never been allowed to enter, and in return they gave him what wealth could never buy: family. In boardrooms where rivals once feared his silence, Edward now carried a deeper strength. When questioned about his decision, he offered a single line that etched itself into the memory of all who heard it. "True wealth is not what we keep, but what we give to those with nothing left." Months later, at a charity gala, he walked in, not alone but with Amina holding his hand and Elijah on his shoulders. The very hall that once ignored their cries now stood in reverent quiet. Guests who had once sneered found themselves lowering their eyes, ashamed of their indifference. And in that silence, Edward understood. Justice had not been delivered by money or law, but by the unshakable dignity of 2 children who dared to ask for love in a world that had denied them everything. In the snow that night, Amina's plea had changed not just her fate, but his. And as the story spread, whispered from city to city, people remembered one truth above all: the strongest voices are not the loudest. They are the ones spoken by those who risk everything to be heard.